Welcome to another episode of the Carolyn Glick Show. This week we have a special show. We're in a week of anniversaries. This week we mark not only Rosh Hashanah, we mark 30 years to the Oslo Accords. That fateful moment, that fateful handshake on the White House lawn between PLO chief Yassir Arafat and then Prime Minister and Defense Minister, the late Yitzhak Rabin. And that moment was a pivot point in Israeli history, in the history of the global fight against terrorism, and of, I would argue, Zionism and the Jewish people. And it was for the worse, not for the better. It was a disastrous day, and it was a dark day. And I'll just begin by telling the story, which was that 8 years later, I was writing for Makori Shon, a Hebrew newspaper here in Israel, and I was writing a retrospective on 8 years to the Oslo Accords, and a friend of mine called me up and he said, "Carolyn, turn on the TV. You got to watch." And I said, no, I'm chasing a deadline. I'm going to be late. And he said, "Turn on the TV this instant." I turned on the TV. The first plane had just gone into the World Trade Center, and then I'm watching, and the second plane goes into the second tower. And I called up my editor at the time, and I said, "Look, I'm going to need a later deadline because I have to start a whole new story." But in a way, a lot of the things that caused 9/11 or enabled 9/11 to happen are the same things that caused or enabled the disaster of Oslo to happen. And I could think of nobody better for the 30th anniversary of that handshake. And also, by the way, of the 23rd anniversary of 9/11, to have in the studio to discuss the Oslo process and what it revealed about a lot of the decision-making in Israel. Then Yigal Carmon. Yigal Carmon, a former intelligence officer in the IDF, a colonel, also former advisor to two prime ministers, to Yitzhak Shamir and to Rabin, Yitzhak Rabin, founded, I would argue, one of the most important institutions that has been founded over the past generation, the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI, where he not only founded it, but till today he serves as the president of it. And MEMRI does an essential task, which is that it brings the Arabic, and now I understand other languages as well, their press and what they're saying amongst themselves to the wider public. And it has had an extraordinary impact on our knowledge base and on our ability to make decisions based upon what's actually happening on the ground. So first of all, let me just welcome you, Yigal Carmon, to the Carolyn Glick Show.
Thank you, Carolyn. If I may add a word about MEMRI, we translate from Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, Turkish, and as of last 9 years, Russian, and as of last 4 years, Chinese.
Wow.
Yes. And I would say one thing, forgive me that self-praise, because it's Professor Bernard Lewis, the renowned scholar of the Arab and Muslim world, who said about MEMRI the following: this is the single most important development in Middle East studies in the last 25 years. He said it 10 years ago or more, before he died, some years before he died. And we try to be truthful to his definition. We feel that responsibility, and we try our best. And we have successes with Russian, with Chinese, very important revelations, and of course lately with the anti-Semitic comments by Abbas that the PLO tried to remove from anywhere online, but we were there to record it in time. We work all along the clock, and we had it.
Well, we may talk about that, Mahmoud Abbas's latest August 24th speech. I actually quoted it in my article from last week in JNS. You guys can read it on the website, that he actually blamed the Jews for the Holocaust, and he also said that Ashkenazi Jews aren't Semites and they're not real Jews. I mean, it was a Nazi speech. But before we get to that, the thing about what you did was, I mean, you started translating public statements by Arafat and other Palestinian leaders before you founded MEMRI. What you founded MEMRI in what year?
98.
98. So you were actually doing this beforehand.
Yeah.
And one of the stories that came out, I mean, it came out a while ago, but it was given renewed prominence, I think, last year, was that Arafat signed the deal or it was actually Mahmoud Abbas who signed it, but Arafat was there over him at the White House lawn on September 13th, 1993. But then he came back, or then he gave a series of statements. Well, first of all, while the signing ceremony was going on, the Palestinian media was broadcasting an address by him saying that what they were doing in White House was actually part of the stage plan for the liberation. Right.
Speech where
That this was part of the stage plan for the liberation of Palestine from 1974, and then after he came to Israel with the establishment of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza and Jericho in 1994, he gave a series of speeches where he called for the Palestinians to carry out jihad against Israel, and you had a copy of his speeches, and you tried to get the most important at the time, the most influential Israeli reporter, Nahum Barnea from Yediot Achronot, to publish the news, and you had an interesting response from him that I think speaks to what the media did during Oslo. So why don't you tell that story?
Well, I came to him with what I had, the video, which later became MEMRI TV, video clips with subtitles, and I showed him. And I said, look, this is the truth. And he said to me, there is no truth. Each piece of information should be judged by the question, whom does it serve? And you are serving the enemies of peace. And I answered, I said, and you are Israel Prize winner for journalism. So he said, if you want to play naive, do it with others. I'm right. I said, no, I don't know that you're right. To the contrary, you're absolutely wrong. And this is the truth. And to come back to what you just mentioned, Arafat had two messages for the religious people and for the secular. For the secular, he said, this is just the implementation of our plan of strategies. And to the religious, he said, this is Hudaybiyah. Like the Prophet, we make an agreement, and later on, it's limited in time, and no problem with that. So this is the truth. And by the way, also the anti-Semitic talk of Abbas, it's not a one-time thing. We are publishing now another piece showing that it reflects his long-held ideas and understanding, like Qaradawi, who said the very same things, and he was a religious one, like many others. That's how they understand the Holocaust. So it's nothing unique that he came out with suddenly. And
no, he wrote his dissertation, which was essentially Holocaust revisionism and denial. And
well, let me talk about the dissertation for a second. We have the original. We bought it in Moscow for $1,000. We have it in Russian. He doesn't speak Russian. Someone wrote it for him. We know who. We talked to him, a gentleman called Kiselyov. He died. He told us about it. And in the dissertation, which focuses on the Heskem HaAvara,
the transfer agreement.
The transfer agreement of 1935, this is the focus of the dissertation. There is not one word of Holocaust denial. And why? Because the Russians do not deny the Holocaust. They are proud of liberating Auschwitz. So where is the Holocaust denial? He translated the Russian, he gave it, the translation, into Arabic. And in the Arabic, there is an addition of 8 pages of introduction. And there is the Holocaust denial in Arabic.
So he went out of his way after somebody in the
Someone wrote it. The people who wrote it are not Holocaust deniers.
Well, the Oriental University where he got his PhD was this KGB institution for training foreign cadres from the third world to be Soviet agents, essentially.
The old marshals of the KGB, and so the edition has even that introduction in Arabic of 8 pages has even a quote, a forged quote, a total invented quote from Raoul Hilberg, who is a very renowned Holocaust researcher, historian, and he wrote the book, The Destruction of European Jewry, and he attributes to Raoul Hilberg, in his book, page 670, a fake number of less than 1 million. And of course, you go to the book of Raoul Hilberg, no such thing. No such thing. So when people talk about
away from Abbas for a second, because I want to go back to Barnea.
Okay.
The Oslo process was basically predicated on 2 assumptions, which were both completely incorrect. And I think most of your work focuses on the first, but I'll just start with the second because we're not going to really talk about it as much. The second one is that, I don't think we are anyway, is that Israel is responsible for the Palestinian conflict with it because it controls Judea and Samaria and then, of course, Gaza and Jerusalem, and that the land for peace, where we give them land, is the only means of getting peace, and therefore the onus for making peace falls on Israel and not so much on the Palestinians. They're here to receive, and we're here to give. So that's the second assumption. And the first assumption, which becomes more to the fore in the public discourse in Israel about the Palestinian Authority, about Abbas today and previously about Arafat, was that the PLO had turned a corner and that they abjured terrorism, that they accepted Israel's right to exist, for instance, in the 1988 Declaration of Independence that Arafat gave, and that therefore we could now trust them as a partner in peace and build a Palestinian autonomy leading towards a Palestinian state that would be controlled entirely by the PLO. So you bring to Nahum Barnea at that time proof that this was a fraud. And he said, you're a political actor. So can you talk a little bit about how the ingrained sense on the Israeli side, but also the ferocity on the Palestinian side of the rejection of that assumption?
Well, let me begin with something close to it, actually, like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that we are celebrating 3 anniversaries, or mourning 3 anniversaries, 9/11 today,
30th anniversary.
Then Oslo, and then October 6th, Yom Kippur War.
50 years.
In all 3 cases, the intelligence people did not fulfill their duty, and the politicians did not fulfill their duty. And it's not a matter of right and left. 9/11, it's totally unconnected to that, and you can see how there was intelligence, and it was not related to. There were 2 of the pilots that hijacked one of the planes. They were in Los Angeles. There was what was later called a wall created between FBI and CIA. The FBI could not act upon judicially, interrogation and all that, upon information from the CIA. They had to have their own. And they missed to, moreover, there was information that we had, albeit one side of it, where there was a debate between sheikhs. One in Kuwait that said it's absolutely legitimate to hijack a plane and hit it into a building, and the Mufti of Saudi Arabia said it is not allowed religiously. And we published that. and there was no one to consider what does it mean. They talk about October 6th, Yom Kippur War. Today, everybody knows there was ample information, and the intelligence officer did not perform their duty. And now back to Oslo. In Oslo, the same. Jacques Neria was advisor to Rabin. He says Rabin didn't know what were Arafat's positions. There were intelligence officers to tell him, my God, you are the leader of the country. Take a vacation for 2 weeks and study everything yourself. This is your responsibility. Left, right, center, who cares? Study it. This is the fate of your people. Study it yourself. This is what
Jacques Neria explained to Rabin?
No, Jacques says Rabin didn't know what were Arafat's positions.
And so you're saying, so why didn't you learn them?
Of course.
Right.
And let alone the officers, the intelligence officer who didn't tell him anything, they didn't know anything. You know, Tom Friedman is not too much to the right? And he already said long ago, what matters with the Arabs is what they say in public. And now, if I may,
let me just interrupt you for 1 second.
Sorry.
You know, I mean, the thing is that when you look at this deliberate sort of denial that you just don't want to know, how do you explain it? I mean, I remember in 1988, I had an argument with Benny Begin when he came to speak at my university, at Columbia University, and he said, we can't recognize the PLO. And I said, but what happens if they're lying? And Israel agrees to sit down with them, and then we can prove that they're liars. What's wrong with that? And he said, because I don't remember what his response was, but at least, you know, several years later, it was clear that the problem was that once you've moved down that road, you're already on it. So there was a moment there, right, in 1993, where you could have done that due diligence and actually thought about this before you took the plunge, and we got into this position where we're in today.
Yeah. So what happens with security, with intelligence officers? Low level of performance. There is no way around it. Amidror said, we didn't know what they're saying.
He was the head of intelligence analysis at Israel Military
Intelligence. We didn't know what they say in public. I was approached by Prime Minister Barak at the time, and the intelligence didn't have what they say in public. I supplied it. I created a booklet about their... By the way, there were terrorist attacks, so it spoke for itself without statements, but the statements were there.
And they're also lying. I mean, in 1995, I think it was in August, I can't remember, 96, then President, 96, I don't know, it was when they supposedly convened the Palestinian National Council in Gaza to abrogate the PLO covenant that calls for Israel's annihilation, and Clinton was there and everything like that. So there was this debate that I was at, you know, when I was in the Army, and we get the summary, and it says from Amman, from intelligence, which says that, you know, they said that they were going to form a committee to discuss changes. So they didn't change anything.
Of course.
They've said they were going to form a committee. So the point was that they didn't change the covenant that calls for Israel's annihilation. So again, this was a breach. This was proof that they had not turned the corner. They were not a partner for peace. And yet they're in the presence of the President of the United States, President Clinton. You know, everybody's happily announcing that the PLO just annulled the clauses in the covenant that calls for Israel's annihilation. And so there's this argument inside of the intelligence services about how we're supposed to look at this very clear non-abrogation of anything. And they came up with this idea that they embraced, which was a total lie, which was that forming a committee was the same thing. So they did have the information. They just didn't look at it.
Well, there were areas where they had information, like in October 6th, there was ample information. There were areas where they didn't have information, and they didn't perform their duty either. There are many ways in which you don't perform your duty. One is omitting, not knowing, another is hiding and lying. But the problem is rarely only with the intelligence people. Rabin brings to the cabinet.
Here you have the protocols of the cabinet meeting, approving the Oslo Accords.
Yeah, that were announced or let open
on television
a few days ago. And there he says about, and terrorism is one of the subjects, he says about stopping terrorism, which was, by the way, given already. It's the same
concession.
But anyway, he says, Shimon Peres, that there might be a statement about it, and maybe not, and maybe to a third party. Oh my God. The main issue for Israel is stopping terrorism, which will enable you to talk to them even. Shimon told me there might be not. This is how you bring, and the ministers are voting on something where the Prime Minister says that. Shimon told me, maybe yes, maybe no, we don't know. I'm speechless. I think this is not right and left. This is crazy. And then there are other elements that they brought to the cabinet, a uncooked agreement where several issues that are crucial are not clear, are not cooked yet, like the jurisdiction. Is it going to be ours or theirs? The minister asks, what, this is an agreement? I say, this is not how you buy an apartment. The territorial area is not clear. Do you buy an apartment without knowing the territorial element of it? Who is signing it? Imagine that in the middle of the whole thing, the signatory is changed. 2 weeks, this document shows 2 weeks before Oslo, before the White House launch signature, Rabin and Peres tell the ministers, we are not signing with the PLO. We insist on that the signatories will be the heads of the delegations, the Jordanian, Palestinian. There was a delegation.
Because let me just back up. So in 1992, the first Bush administration, George H.W. Bush, started a peace process at Madrid.
Yes.
And at that process, you had a joint Jordanian-Palestinian delegation, and the Palestinian members of that delegation were at least openly not members of the PLO.
Right.
I mean, they were, but they pretended that they weren't. So those negotiations were ongoing, and the secret talks that Peres sent his private citizen representatives to carry out in Oslo, they actually subverted the talks in Washington. They undermined them, and yet those talks were on a formal basis still ongoing. Yes. And nobody knew publicly what was happening in Oslo.
And 2 weeks before the Oslo, Peres says, Rabin say, we are not signing with the PLO. We insist on not signing with the PLO.
So they wanted to recycle the Oslo Accord that they reached behind the backs of everybody in Washington to Washington.
It's so childish. You talk to them, you discuss what you talked about, and then you think that you will sign with the delegation. Arafat came to the White House lawns, and he saw the document and said, I'm not signing this. I'm leaving. And the Israeli side could not do the same. And they abided by his demand.
Why couldn't they do the same?
I'll quote again. I learned this document almost by heart. I'll quote again Rabin. He said, this agreement is the to be or not to be document for this government, this coalition.
So what he's saying is that our political future depends on us bringing...
Political of the party involved. Yeah.
Depends on us implementing a half-baked deal with a terrorist organization who owes us nothing, who is required under the terms of this deal to provide nothing.
They gave it once and violated it to the Americans, and now maybe they give it to us, maybe not, we don't know, maybe to a third party. And
they already violated it. After they gave the commitment to the Americans to stop terrorism, they carried out the attack on
Shavuot attack on the
Ashkelon,
on Rishon and Tel Aviv.
Okay.
And let me say this, because I was personally involved, they had on the map also the American embassy. And I came to Shamir, I worked then.
This was in 1990.
1990, May. And I showed him that. And the chief of intelligence at the time, and better for his memory that I don't mention his name, he tried to hide it from the prime minister that they wanted to attack. They had several targets, and they wanted to attack the American embassy.
So the chief of intelligence, was that Ori Sagi?
No. Another one, a general. That's when I say it is the low level of performance of officers and politicians. And you don't have to be left and right for this.
But then why would the head of intelligence at that time in 1990, and I'll have to look up and see who it was. It was Amnon Lipkin-Shahak. So the future...
The guy with the record of fighting for Israel, impeccable.
Right, and then he led the Israeli negotiations for the Gaza-Jericho agreement as deputy chief of staff, and he was the chief of staff during the Oslo negotiations.
And he was hiding it from the prime minister.
Why would he hide it from the prime minister? What would give him...
Any thought that I would have might be right, might be wrong. I better not answer.
You didn't ask him?
No, we quarreled about it. No. Look, he had other considerations. What can I tell you? This is the problem. Other consideration involving the pure intelligence that was in 9/11, in
Yom Kippur,
and in Oslo. It's the same phenomenon.
But it's very strange because let me just give you an example. You and Benny Begin wrote an article about the failure of Israeli intelligence around Oslo and Haaretz over the weekend, and I went through it very clearly carefully, and I documented all the different things, and we may get to it or not, but, I was thinking about it. I remember when the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt in 2012, I spoke at the Jerusalem Post conference, and Gabi Ashkenazi, had just finished as chief of staff of the IDF, was there. And he said in his speech, we had no indication that if Mubarak were to fall, that the Muslim Brotherhood would take over. So I thought that was absurd because I had been writing about it based on MEMRI publications in the Jerusalem Post for years that this was going to happen. And it was all based on what you guys published from the Egyptian media. So I got up after he spoke, and I said to him, Gabi Ashkenazi just said that nobody anticipated the Muslim Brotherhood takeover of Egypt. Well, I did. I did. I wrote about it repeatedly. I warned about it, and then I cited MEMRI's work, and I said it was all in the Egyptian media that was translated by MEMRI. So the interesting thing here is that when the Muslim Brotherhood took over Egypt, Israel was appalled, and we recognized the danger. We recognized the strategic threat to everything that manifested, and we stood against the Americans who supported the Muslim Brotherhood, and we said this is a disaster, and we also supported the Egyptian military and Sisi when they overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood regime. But here, so you could say that they were listening to their intelligence report and not to the media in 93. They got it wrong. But whereas in 2013, Israel was able to then accept the truth and act on it and recognize the danger that the Muslim Brotherhood posed in Oslo in 93, and then really in the 30 years since, we haven't seen a corresponding willingness on the part of our military leadership, our intelligence leadership, to make the kind of leap from an intelligence failure to a policy success that's rooted in reality that we saw with the Muslim Brotherhood takeover.
Well, I would say that there was some recognition. Again, I quote Jacques Neria, who worked side by side with Rabin for a year or 2 years, and he says on video that Rabin said that Oslo was a national disaster.
When did he say it?
I have the video. I sent it.
No, when did Rabin say it?
He said it probably to Jacques.
Okay.
And not in public, but maybe he said it more than just to Jacques. And Peres said to Benny Begin, Oslo haya ta'ut.
It was a mistake.
Oslo was a mistake. So they do recognize their own part in defining it in general terms as a national disaster, as a mistake, but they cannot make up for the intelligence officers who made the original mistake to not explain what are we talking about. We're talking talking to an organization that was established before the territories existed, and whose ideology is, to this very day, take history back, take it back to Jaffa, Haifa, Tel Aviv, and Abbas, like others. They used to go with the map of Palestine, and now Abbas goes, it's more moving apparently, with a
lapel pin. With a key. A key.
Not anymore. The key is more appealing to people. My home key, not the whole map. So this is who we talk with. And to make an agreement when this is what they have in their heart, how can you even figure out that there can be such an agreement? And indeed, there wasn't. It was all lies and fabrications, and I would, as I'm saying, it's low level of officers, of intelligence officers, but also of the politicians that bring an uncooked thing, and all the ministers are signing it. And they debate it, and they talk about all the loopholes or whatever holes in this agreement, and at some point Rabin tells them there are countless number of problems. We should not enter into it now. No, this is how you buy an apartment. There are a countless number of them, and let's not. And you don't know the territorial area, you don't know the jurisdiction, you don't know who is signing it. You buy an apartment and then the signatory changes in front of your eyes suddenly. Rabin said on Friday before the signature on TV that he's not going there. Within 3 days he was there signing. Abbas writes a whole book, The Road to Oslo, and he shows on the cover, and I have it, I'll give it to you, himself signing, and it tells the story that he erased the signatory title, the
Palestinian Jordanian delegation,
and wrote instead PLO, which on page 6 of this document says we are not signing, we insist on not signing with the PLO. This is not.
But I don't understand, because the letters of mutual recognition that Arafat and Rabin signed as a precursor to the signing ceremony at the White House lawn, if I'm not mistaken, Rabin recognized the PLO as a sole legit. Yeah, right. On the 9th of September, he He recognized the PLO. So he knew he was signing with the PLO. We all knew he was signing with the PLO.
Of course. On the 9th of September, 3 days before the signature, they did not intend to do it with the PLO. And he says it. We insist on not doing it with the PLO. Because with the PLO, there are countless of problems.
See, we had this problem with Rabin all along, which was that on paper, in sort of the discussions ahead of things, he was very hardcore. And then when it came to very clear that if this happens, then there'll be no agreement, right? I mean, if they do this. So you gave one example, which is the cooperation agreement that they signed with Hamas. Yes. So the agreement that they signed with Hamas, because I was there and I saw the person who negotiated with was actually Mohammed Dakhlan ahead of time. Behind the scenes, that agreement was negotiated between two Mohammeds. Mohammed Dakhlan was the head of the Preventive Security Forces in Gaza, and Mohammed Def, who was his counterpart in Hamas. He was Yahya Yash's successor as the head of Hamas. And they had been together in Beersheba prison, and they grew up, I think, in Shati refugee camp in Gaza. So they were old friends from childhood and from jail, where they were serving terms for terrorism. And the Israeli negotiators loved Dakhlan. They loved him because he spoke to them in Hebrew. And they thought, and he learned Hebrew while he was imprisoned in Beersheba prison because he had played such a role in organizing the first Palestinian uprising in the 1980s. So they loved him because he spoke gutter Hebrew from prison. And then here he is behind their backs, negotiating this deal with Hamas. And what does the deal say?
Well, the deal basically says, don't announce, do whatever you want, don't make an announcement. Hamas says we don't want to embarrass the PLO.
Well, also don't carry out terrorist attacks from areas that are under the Palestinian Authority's control.
Do it from away. Yeah, it's a division of work. But Dakhlan, by the way, was personally responsible for an attack on an Israeli bus of tourists to Egypt and many killed. So this was, but
he was also involved in 2003 with the attack on the convoy from the U.S. Embassy going to interview Fulbright scholarship candidates in Gaza.
Again and again, it goes this combination of low level of performance of officers, of intelligence officers, and then the politicians who need something else, but at the end of the day, they know they don't want it. And they say, oh, we're not signing with the PLO, and then they sign. Like little children who talk to them, you think that they will not be the ones to sign it. There are so many levels in which Jerusalem, nothing understood, nothing. There was a question of voting and being voted, and
in the Palestinian election.
Yes, and it's all undecided, everything left in the air, and the ministers are approving it because this is the to be or not to be for this government, this coalition, and they say it. To read this document of the meeting of the cabinet of the government on 2 weeks before they win is so painful, because you see people at their lowest, and to think that they decided for the life of their nation, for the life of their people, it's so painful. And the security or the intelligence officers, it's I must say, it is mind-boggling, it's painful, and it's not, I insist on that, it's not political. one doesn't have to have that position or another position to feel that pain that those in charge are simply לא שווים, worthless.
They're terrible. They're feckless.
Just
Irresponsible.
and irresponsible. Horrible recklessness. This happened in October 6th, and this happened in America before 9/11.
And, there's been arguments, all the presidents, what is it, the best and the brightest about all of the people around JFK who just believed because they were so competent that they could absolutely do Vietnam and the same thing with the Iraq War.
All Israelis should read this document that was made public. The meeting of the government 2 weeks before.
See, the thing is that I think one of the returning themes, whether it's Nahum Barnea and the media in Israel, it just acts as a herd. They're not actually journalists, and they haven't been, at least since Oslo, in terms of hiding the nature of things, mischaracterizing the nature of things, presenting, as Nahum Barnea did to you, anybody who points out reality about the false assumptions guiding the Oslo process. And here in the specific instance, Palestinian intentions, that they are enemies of peace and the moral equivalence of terrorists, because both of them must be enemies of peace, so that instead of having a discussion that would get us to a safer place, they decide that the discussion actually has to be about demonizing anybody who acknowledges reality as a terrorist.
2 examples of journalists that are decent, that are serious in their relation to what they see. One is Stephen Rosenfeld. He was in the Washington Post. He was very much on the left. He was the op-ed editor. And yet he met with me, and I showed him the material that the PLO is publishing. On the day of our creation, February 7, 1998, he wrote an article in the Washington Post.
You're about MEMRI.
Yeah, titled On Fire with Hate, about the PLO. He was what you would call a lefty. Now let me go back to Tom Friedman, who praised MEMRI. I'm quoting him. And he said, what matters, I learned this, and what matters with the Arab is not what they tell you in private, but what they publish in public. He understood it. He said it. Namely, relate to what they are saying in public. Whether you are lefty, like Tom Friedman, or not, relate to what they say.
Yes, and instead, as we were talking about Ami Dror, he writes in 2003, in retrospect, when Israel is burning and that so many people have already been murdered as a result of this, that we wanted to believe something different. We wanted to believe that the public declarations weren't important, so we went to our private information, our intelligence information, and tried to see how. Where that it meant that what they said in public wasn't important. And again, they came up with these lies that they just told themselves, and they entered into this closed circle where they're reading the intelligence materials and they're saying, you don't understand because you don't have this special knowledge that we have. But the special knowledge that they have is either telling them what they don't want to see and therefore they ignore it, which is what happened, for instance, with the PLO covenant. That was not, and so they just pretended that they didn't see it, or it's telling, or it's deliberately deceiving them because people know that they're being listened to. And, it's all kinds of things that go into that intelligence information.
What they want to, is that to do with intelligence?
Oh, and Mohammed Suleiman, Omer Suleiman, who was Mubarak's chief of intelligence in Egypt. So at that Jerusalem Post conference that I referred to earlier, so Gabi Ashkenazi said that they were talking to Omer Suleiman. So Omar Suleiman is probably the second to last person in Egypt, following Mubarak himself, who doesn't want to believe that the Muslim Brotherhood can rise to power, right? And so because he was considered one of Mubarak's leading contenders to succeed Mubarak when he died or whatever. So he is telling the Israelis, I have inside knowledge. I'm the head of the intelligence service in Egypt, and I'm telling you that the Muslim Brotherhood can't rise to power. And without thinking for even 1 second about what is motivating Omar Suleiman to say this, they said, well, what Yigal Carmon is translating from the Egyptian media is totally unimportant because we have special knowledge, which we're getting from Omar Suleiman. And it's sort of the same thing here, except again, I go back, and I know you don't want to talk about it so much, so I'll say something, and if you want to respond, you can, and if you don't want to respond, that's also fine, and then we'll move on, which is that you see that there is a herd mentality of the elite in Israel, which is overly represented in the military hierarchy and the Shabak hierarchy, and of course in the media, which have an interest in two things. Or it's really the same thing. That same thing is political power, is controlling the country, and they do it through controlling the discourse, what you're allowed to know, how they cast things, enemies of peace people, or the peace camp, and how they present reality to you, what you're seeing, and I can give an example of that, although it's not necessary. Or intelligence that wants to highlight information that advances a certain objective and wants to hide information that does not. And politicians who say that this is do or die moment for us. If we go away from this, we're done for. And they all are moving in the same direction. And the other half of it is demonizing the people who are clinging to reality. I mean, you have about as much in common, probably ideologically, as the Yesha Council, as I have with the heads of the Kaplan brigades, in Tel Aviv.
And from childhood, the socialists.
Right. So, and yet from their perspective, Yigal Carmon, who keeps he's the stickler for actually pointing out reality to us, is the moral equivalent of all the hilltop youth who everybody's supposed to hate.
Yes, and that's low level of...
But if everything is a political power play, then it's a natural instinct of people to reach that conclusion. Because if you're not in our group, then by definition you're in the other group, and the other group is bad.
But then you have Rabin saying this was a national disaster, what he signed, and Peres saying it was ta'ut,
A mistake.
And Amidor says we didn't look at this material, and countless others. At some point they wake up and admit. Many others maybe wouldn't admit or wouldn't relate to it at all, but people at the end of the day see the reality.
But he said that in 2003. He said that in 2003, and in 2005 we had the withdrawal from Gaza, which was also had mountains of information out there at the time saying what was going to happen.
Right. Look, countless number of articles were written about the information that was there before 9/11. And people didn't have really a political position about it. It was, there was, because this wall was created by the Justice Department at the time, Janet Reno, who had positions. But I would say, even if you had asked her, had she known that these two pilots are there and the wall is not allowing the FBI to arrest them and to take it, how is that connected? Takes October 6. There wasn't really right and left there. And
so how do you explain?
Ignored the information.
Yes.
There is a story is now coming out that the head of the Mossad, Shamir, went to meet the biggest agent we ever had. I'm sorry to say it because it was already out there, and I allow myself to repeat that. And he doesn't even ask him about the war. He asks him about something else. And Ashraf Marwan tells him, look, there is a war tomorrow. He doesn't rise from his chair to go and call Golda. It took him another 2 hours.
But again, there is a big...
Where is the right and left here?
Big difference. A big difference between the way that the failures of the Americans on 9/11 and the failure of the intelligence failure in 9/11 and the intelligence failure on October 6th were seen by both the people who failed and by the politicians and the general public in their aftermath. And in today, the same people who brought this disaster on us, Yossi Beilin, Gilad Sharon, Ehud Barak, all of the senior people on the left politically today, the IDF, they refuse to acknowledge that the PLO is not a partner. And they say that Oslo wasn't a mistake and that there's no alternative to Oslo, and that the people who are in charge today are messianic and are fascists, in part because they want to finally turn the corner on Oslo. And so, and I saw this, I listened to this podcast yesterday that Gilad Sharon, who was Ehud Barak's top negotiator at Camp David, and then at Sharm el-Sheikh after that collapsed, gave. And he's now the person who controls the organization that funds all of the left wing's protests against the government. He gave this podcast to this journalist, I think his last name is Tubi, who said, and where he said, Oslo was right. It was completely right. The only reason that it failed, there were two reasons. One was Baruch Goldstein's massacre of the Arabs, the Muslims at the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron in 1994 in March. And the second was Rabin's assassination. If those two, and he blamed all Palestinian terrorism on Baruch Goldstein, and he blamed everything else that has happened since November 4th, 1995, Rabin's assassination, on the Israeli right. And I'll just give you the example from July, which was, and we see it still today. Yesterday, on September 10th, there was, I think, the 50th projectile of the year shot off at the Gilboa region of Israel from Jenin, so that they're starting their Qassam industry in northern Samaria, which they have control of largely because of the destruction of the Jewish communities in northern Samaria. But whatever the case. So the IDF goes into Jenin refugee camp in July to clean it out because it had become, again, a terror-infested nest. And then the IDF announces that the point of this 3-day mission is to transfer security control over Jenin from Islamic Jihad, Hamas, whoever they claim was in charge, to the Palestinian Authority. But the Palestinian Authority itself was bragging that its own personnel had carried out 2/3 of the terrorist attacks from Jenin. So you see here, the IDF is still going along with Oslo. It was a disaster, it was a mistake, but it's still the only valid strategy for Israel.
Well, I don't know that there are so many that defend Oslo today. Look at the Labour Party. It's gone. Meretz is gone.
Benny
there are some
Gantz.
spokesmen. Pardon?
Benny Gantz doesn't walk away from it. Neither does Yair Lapid.
Okay, and then this statement by Gilad Sharon. You know why he talks about Baruch Goldstein and the murder of Rabin? Because they want to hook to the large public, because these are two horrible crimes that were committed, and they want all of us to come along these. We have a basis, a shared basis. Of course we condemn Baruch Goldstein horrible terror acts. Of course we condemn the murder of Rabin. But what is that to do? He tries to bring it to an area where he wants to bring us all to the same notion of his. But no, we stick with the intelligence that was there, and you didn't act about it. You, Gilad Sharon, others. This is the problem, and not the murder of Rabin, and not the horrible murder of Palestinians in the mosque in Hebron, which we all condemn harshly. It won't work for him to create a false basis that this is the problem. No, the problem was the lack of serious consideration of the intelligence that preceded so long these horrible attacks.
I agree with you, except again that the knee-jerk response of Rabin before, obviously, when he was in charge, and then of Paris, and other left-wing leaders since then, Barak, Olmert, was always to blame their political opponents for the failure of their projects with the Palestinians. So, Rabin referred to them as, he demeaned the right all the time, attacked them from the Knesset as propellerim as propellers who just spin in the wind, and their fears that we would get Katyushas from Gaza. It was insane, and all of this other stuff, and Sharon, if anything ever falls, or Barak, if anything ever falls, we're going to go right back in there and get them. And it was always never true.
No. Rabin said that if Arafat would not fight terrorism, by the way, without Bagatz and B'Tselem and mothers and a very inhumane approach.
But there he went against Israelis again. He said that Arafat wouldn't have these horrible human rights organizations.
Yes, about Barak, about Bagatz and B'Tselem and all.
So he demeaned Israel's institutional framework.
Of course. But and then when he was in Alexandria in a meeting of the four, Mubarak and King Hussein and Arafat and Rabin, and the hours before there was a bus suicide bombing or some other attack, and Arafat would say he's supposed to act against it. He said, "This is the Shabak. This is the..." So Rabin rose up from his chair and just left the meeting, and Mubarak had to bring him back. He had natural reactions that corresponded 100% to the truth. And then he had others of ignoring the truth, of not learning the truth. It was his responsibility not to count on the intelligence. This was the responsibility of the leaders before October 6th, to read everything themselves, because if there would be a war, it would be catastrophic. And they didn't do it. And the same goes for 9/11. And there is no way around the fact that the slow level of performance of people who are both the military, who are in charge of our lives, and the political level was even more so, and they did not do, in all cases, and in America, they did not do what we count on them to do.
Okay, so obviously I don't disagree with you. I think and I don't think that there's a dispute between us on this either, but I think we both agree that there were presumptions at the basis of Oslo that were wrong, and that they were proven wrong very, very quickly.
With the material, with the intelligence.
With the intelligence, and also with reality. I mean, you did not need to be reading the intelligence reports in order to know. I mean, in fact, there was this one scene in 1996, and I think that was when intelligence finally acknowledged the deal between Arafat and Yassir and the head of Hamas, where we had 4 terrorist attacks in 8 days, and over 60 Israelis were murdered, and I think I don't remember, definitely over 100 and maybe over 1,000, I don't remember, were wounded in 4 suicide bombings. And there was, and I'll never forget it, there was this young man in Katamonim, neighborhood of Jerusalem, where they had just had a second bus attack on Route 18 in a week, and he starts screaming at the cameras, and he says, "Paris, don't you see us? We're Jews. They're killing us." And I just remember sitting in front of the television and just crying, because that isn't what Paris saw. That, like, Paris wouldn't see that. Paris wasn't looking at that. Paris enabled those terrorist bombers to leave Gaza because the Palestinians were saying, well, we want, we need back-to-back trucks bringing cargo out. Otherwise, where our strawberries aren't going to get to the port in Ashdod, and we're going to all starve to death. And the Americans were saying to Paris, you got to let them out. And Yossi Genassar, who was this, corrupt and corrosive former Shabak person who was acting as Arafat's advisor, was pressuring all of these generals in the army to let everybody out, because otherwise he was going to lose a lot of money. And so at the end of the day, you had all of these corrosive, corrupting people. You had international pressure on us from the Americans to open up Gaza, to let everything out. And then you had all these Israelis who were murdered as a result. And Paris was seeing all the people talking to him, and he wasn't seeing the Israelis who were being murdered.
All the intelligence. Let me say one thing. I want to quote, back to MEMRI, I want to quote my dear friend, former head of the CIA, of the NSA, Director of National Intelligence, General Mike Hayden, who said at some point in support of MEMRI, he said, we learn a lot of things through what you may call breaking into safes. But the understanding we get from MEMRI, what is this understanding? It's the public statements. This is the understanding. It's the framework in which all these pieces of intelligence fit into. This is the understanding. Who is the PLO? What can you expect from them? Of course, you can also look, they made an agreement with the Americans, and 2 years later, they committed an attack that targeted even the American embassy. So you have enough material to learn. And if you did not learn it or rejected it, then you are responsible for all the lives that were, the blood that was shed, the lives that were lost.
You look at it and you think to yourself, okay, now if you were a CEO of an organization or, a chief operating officer, and you make decisions that make you lose money, then you're fired. And they try to hire somebody who's competent. But what we've seen in Israel is that people who failed us while they were in the army, they go into politics, they become prime minister. While, in the Shabak, they failed us, they become the head of merits, and you look at this and it's constantly this failing up. And people, or Paris was rewarded with the presidency of Israel after Oslo. And Balin is an honored guest in studios in the media. And on the other hand, people who were right are demonized as politically motivated, far right, whatever. And so there's this thing that you say that you look at the MEMRI translations, you look at what they're saying in public, and then what you find inside of the safe gives you additional layers of understanding of that picture that you're looking at in public. But the same can be said for Israel, right? If I were sitting in Tehran, looking at the leadership structure of Israel, looking at the media landscape of Israel, looking at the leadership of our security people, and seeing all of this failing up, and seeing that the discourse still hasn't really disavowed the basic principles behind Oslo, that the PLO is not a terrorist organization, and that it's our fault that there's a Palestinian conflict with Israel, then you reach certain conclusions about the competence of this country to protect itself.
Right, and I wouldn't say that they would be right about it. I believe, there was a 6th of October. We survived the worst attack on us. There was 48. We survived it. So what the Iranians are seeing, the Ayatollahs from there, is indeed what you just described. But would we collapse? No, we would not. We have stood fast in 48, in October 6. It's not that easy to anymore. We are not in World War II.
So what would they be missing in the picture?
Israel's power. Israel's power. I would call it physical. It's not exactly physical in the sense of, but they are missing Israel's power.
I would
to survive.
I would argue that in addition to the physical power, the people who won the Yom Kippur War were not the people in the boardrooms. They were not the generals. They were the line soldiers who were called up.
Absolutely. Well, the pilots, everybody.
There was a boy in Katamonim who was screaming at Paris and saying, "Don't you see us?"
And that is a big, if they make a mistake, the Iranians, the Ayatollahs, they will suffer immensely. The power, not the brain. We praise ourselves for the brain so many generations and decades and centuries. Now it's our power. It's in a way, it's great. No one can do it to us again.
What can you give me some examples of memories where your translations actually played a role in compelling governments to make decisions based on reality?
Well, I don't know everything that the governments do.
Right.
But let me give you one recent example, most important, away of our region, China. Everybody heard about the balloons.
In America,
over America, the Chinese said it's meteorological, and of course it's
spying.
BS, it's spying. And everybody said spying. Well, we found in a military magazine of the Chinese, again, open sources, that it's not just for spying, it's for attack, for offense. How? These balloons fly so high, 80,000, 90,000 feet. When you throw a stone from this, why are all the satellites falling into the sea? When you throw a stone, a big stone from there, it creates a crater of immense. Now they show the structures, the metal, iron structure that they are going to throw. There are pictures. And it's some 1 meter. It can destroy a city, a military camp, a power plant, a Washington, a dam, anything. No one knew that. I talked to people. They didn't know that. And I talked even to people neighboring China. That's the guy that I talked to. This is about us. This is coming at us. Of course, America. And this is in the open sources. We are also studying, we have two important projects, jihad and the Jihad and Terrorist Threat Monitor, and one DTTM, the domestic terrorism. One is about jihadis, one is about neo-Nazis. And we study them, and we manage to thwart attacks by jihadis. Up till now, we had 10 cases, 7 of them were our sole intelligence, 3 we contributed it, but in a meaningful way. Also, with regard to the neo-Nazis, we study the net with advanced softwares, and we catch them, and we support we are in a how to say that, helpful to intelligence agencies in the world, an auxiliary arm of intelligence agencies.
So how about your jihadist thing?
I'll give you just one story about a singer. I won't mention his name, a very known singer in America that was about to have a concert in Cardiff, Wales. And we learned that they want to bomb him like they bombed Ariana Grande in Birmingham. And we reported it and we saved it. That's just one example.
Did he have the concert or it was canceled?
No, it was canceled, yeah. But later, maybe he had. I don't follow it. He's bad enough anyway. But I'll tell you about it later. But to thwart, we perceive ourselves as an auxiliary arm of intelligence agencies in the world against neo-Nazis, against jihadists.
So about jihadists,
yes.
One of the quotes that you brought that I found extraordinary for a number of reasons, in the article that you and Benny Begin published on Friday, was that when the intelligence, when was it in, I just want to find which one it was. I think it might have been in August of 95. It might have been before that, where they said that Arafat's statements about jihad, but jihad really it can just mean a personal struggle, right? Mein Kampf, right? It just means a personal struggle. And I found that was, I think, the only thing in your article that I wasn't already aware of, that I said, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. I didn't know about that. And what I found so troubling about it, I mean, so incredibly, in a way it was the worst thing, maybe just because it was the only one I didn't know about ahead of time, but it was that, after 9/11, and certainly into the Obama administration and now with the Biden administration, you had this argument inside of the United States about what the nature of jihad is. And I'm sure you remember there was that Muslim student speaker at Harvard's commencement where he was talking about my jihad, my personal jihad, and, my it's all about self-fulfillment, and it was all a lie, and they had this double talk where they were telling Westerners that a jihad is just, a spiritual struggle and who the real me is and blah, 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 and it has nothing to do with Islamic supremacism or imperialism. So how is that still, when you listen to policymakers, you discuss with them what you're seeing here in Israel in particular, but also outside of Israel, how powerful still is the idea that jihad has many meanings?
I can tell you, I think it's less and less, but I want to quote about it a highly related to figure, Sheikh Ahmad Tayyib, the Mufti of Al-Azhar. He had a debate
of Al-Azhar in Egypt.
He had a debate with Sisi. Sisi wanted him to help him to fight the extremists and to talk against jihad. And Ahmad Tayyib tells him, jihad is what brought Islam from the borders of China to the Tour of Poitiers in France. Jihad is what we stand for. Jihad, we published all that. It's a phenomenal piece of art to read. Said, this is us. This is what brought us all over the Arab and Muslim and whatever, India, close to China. This is jihad. And those to tell Ahmad Tayyib what is jihad, it is so mishugget.
It's so interesting.
They want to tell him what is jihad, the Sheikh of Al-Azhar.
I think we're going to have to wrap up. But yeah. I wanted, I was trying to figure out who do I interview for Oslo. And I didn't want to get into too much of a political debate with anybody because I was just tired after 30 years. But the reason I said on you really is because what MEMRI has done is it's placed in people's face the truth that they want to ignore. And I think that, the role that you have played is revolutionary because it makes it so much more difficult today. I wish it were impossible. It's not. but so much more difficult today for people to pretend away reality when they make decisions about these critical issues.
This issue of Abbas with this anti-Semitism, even J Street, Peter Beinart, many, The Guardian, the New York Times, there comes a moment that people like Stephen Roosevelt did not need. He was truthful to what he saw. But these people, they come to a moment, they have to acknowledge it, and they attacked Abbas very fiercely.
What they'll do with that after that?
Still, they would say, this is a one-time, but we are publishing now, not the one time, but the many times. It is, again, as a socialist from age 12, when I was in a youth movement, I say, you don't need to be, I was advisor to Rabin, you don't need to be, when I said that...
You don't need to be on the right to be right.
To be right, to be truthful. When I said to people that there will be Katyushas from Gaza, friends of mine, not lefties, not friends, they said, you're out of your mind, Yigal, titapes.
Get hold of yourself.
Yeah. Katyushas from Gaza with missiles to Haifa. They were... Okay, I was boycotted. I won't enter into this. I suffered a lot.
We can compare inboxes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, Yigal, thank you so much for joining me today on this anniversary week. And may you continue to go from strength to strength with what you do at MEMRI.
Thank you.
One of the good things to come out of this age of delusion in which we live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thank you. All right, and we'll see you again next week. And I might have a couple more thoughts on this in my news analysis this week, so stay tuned for that also, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Oh, and Shana Tova. It's Rosh Hashanah. Shana Tova.